Do you remember the first few hours of being let out?
Oh, that was unreal.
Let's say 40 hours from that time right then. I will be leaving the institution on my own for the first time in a very, very long time.
Well, they say when there's a significant event in someone's life, they remember every detail. And I remember every detail. I remember it was 65 degrees and it was raining that day.
You're listening to Life on the Outside. It's a podcast where people share stories about what it's like to return to society after decades of incarceration.
The house with a big tree. Oh, everybody's out there.
I think I should duck. Oh. Wow, that's so cool. Wow, man, that's a blessing, man. Yeah. Yeah, when we drove up to my house, they had put a big sign across the street. Huge sign, and it said, "Welcome home, Sam." And I'll always remember that. And I got off, and they were all just right there ready to hug me and shake my hand. And I was like, who do I hug first, Because I don't want to be like, this person is more important than the other. So it's like, who do I hug first, It was kind of weird. Kind of like when a little puppy, and there's a lot of people around him. Which one is he going to go to, I felt like the little puppy right there that day.
It looks like Obama just arrived. Welcome home, Sam.
Oh, good to be back. But I remember running through the sign like if it was a finish line. I told him I'm going to run through this sign and break it, because
you ran right through it.
I'm home now, I've passed the finish line, and I did my time in prison and I'm out here now.
Yes!
My name is Sammy Martinez. I was incarcerated in 1996. I originally had a life without parole sentence for a first-degree murder and a robbery. And in 2009, I was resentenced to 25 to life. And I received my parole date on my initial hearing.
What was it like first getting out? Like, what were those first moments like?
Well, they say when there's a significant event in someone's life, they remember every detail. And I remember every detail. I remember it was like about 65 degrees and it was raining that day. And it was just seeing my parents right there waiting in the parking lot and realizing that I'm free. It's kind of hard to take in. Happy at the same time, anxious. But yeah, that first day, just driving on the freeway, and I remember my mom apologizing for the fact that there was going to be a long drive. And I was like, Mom, this is an event for me. This is like Disneyland, being on the freeway, and seeing the cars go by and seeing the trees and the hills and everything else. I said, I'm taking everything in and I'm enjoying the moment. I remember stopping by an A&PM, and I got off with them, and I was just so nervous because I didn't know what to do. Do I stand? Do I walk? Do I wait by the door? Do I look out the window? What do I do with my hands? I felt like, yes, I was guilty because I was in a place where there were no boundaries. And there were things on the shelves that I could reach over and just grab. And there wasn't a guard right there or a staff telling me to stand in line and wait for your turn. I remember looking at the people waiting in line and almost feeling jealous of them because it wasn't a big deal for them. They were just right there buying something like nothing. They were nonchalant about it. And I was right there, taking all this in and having a major life challenge. And so what I did is I picked up a paper and act like I was reading it. But I remember thinking to myself, why are my parents taking so long? I just wanted that to be over with.
Were you caught off guard, or did you feel like you had prepared yourself?
Well, I kind of prepared myself. Like other lifers that had got out, I would hear their stories. But I didn't expect for it to be so awkward those first 2 weeks. And almost feeling like challenged as a man or an adult. And some of this started kind of play a little bit on my self-esteem. And I would talk to other lifers when they were like, this is something that we all go through, It's a learning process. It's a learning curve. Other people might not understand it. The guy, at the teller wondering why the heck this guy don't know how to use a debit card. But it doesn't matter. That's their issue. The thing is that you're out and you're going to learn these things. Before I came to prison, I always I knew how to draw. My mom has recognizable drawings from when I was 2. And so it was just a dream I always had of becoming an artist. And I would just draw all day. Even though in other areas of my life I struggled with self-esteem and all that. But in my art, I always felt that was my place in this world. But I never really pursued the art. I remember when I started falling down that negative path, I just totally forgot about my art, and I felt fulfillment in the wrong things, the gangs, drugs, and all that. And I remember my art instructor pulling me aside, and he says, Sam, he goes, you're a great artist, you're talented, and he says, if you follow a career in art, he says, I can help you to get into the schools. He says, I'll do everything I can to help you to flourish with your talent. I knew what he was saying was right, and I liked what he was saying, but I got a taste of that life that I didn't want to give up. Of course, the gangs, the drugs, the girls, the crime. And I ignored him.
How old were you?
I started hanging around gangs at about the age of 15. Well, I had a 78 Grand Prix, a black 78 Grand Prix, and I usually drove around with about 4 or 5 other gang members. We had shaved heads, and we were wearing dark sunglasses. We had the big baggy pants, the style of the 90s. The flannel shirts and the loud music. Maybe we were playing rap. Maybe we were playing corridos, which are narcotic Spanish songs, glorifying the drug trafficking in Mexico. But that was for us. That was hip at the time. I can imagine anybody seeing a car drive up next to them like that. They're gonna be like, "Whoa, who are these guys? Watch out!" I like the fact that people feared me when I walked into a store or walked into a neighborhood or drove by them. When I would drive around in my lowrider, nobody ever cut me off. Nobody ever had road rage against me. It was almost like I was a cop on the street. They just kind of stayed away and respected. But it was fear, because I was a person that they knew victimized society. I felt some fulfillment. I glorified that life, but at the same time, there was ugliness to it, and uneasiness, knowing that I was living a dangerous life.
And you felt that while it was going on, like you had this sense?
Yeah.
Did you know?
Yeah, I definitely knew. Especially when I would hear of somebody dying or know of somebody that I knew that had got killed because of the gang. But because I would try to be so tough, I would put my life in danger, basically. It started with breaking into cars and breaking into abandoned houses for ditching parties. And before you know it, I was carrying guns and then doing other crimes, I was at a party and we ran out of beer. So there were 2 girls that suggested that we go steal some beer. They call it a beer run. And so we go to a 7-Eleven and they had just stopped selling beer. I say, okay, well, why don't we try a different 7-Eleven? And I'm driving at the time. It was 2:00 in the morning. And while we're going to the other 7-Eleven to see if possibly we could catch him at the last minute, he suggests that we do a robbery. And he just blurts out, "Hey, I do robberies." And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, all I have to do is be the driver. And I'm going to get half the money. We can maybe go buy some drugs with this and continue the party. Because the party was out of drugs, it was out of alcohol, and we were there with these girls, and I didn't want the night to end. So I agreed with him. And the first place that I seen was a Denny's. And so I go into the parking lot, and I leave the car running with the lights off while he goes into the Denny's. We had a gun in the car. I always kept a gun in the car just in case I ran into other gang members. So with this gun, he goes into the Denny's restaurant, and the manager gives him the money. And after he gets the money, he reaches over the counter and he shoots him in the chest. And so I hear a shot, and I'm out there in the parking lot, with the car running. And he runs out, and I'm thinking, why did he shoot? And I ask him, that's the first thing I tell him. And he's shooting back at the restaurant, wildly shooting back. I found out later on the dude is high on speed. And so he's just tripping out, And he tells me, he hesitated. And that's all he said. The next day, I read the paper, and I open up the paper, and it says Denny's manager was shot and murdered. And I was just like, wow, this escalated into a murder. What have I gotten myself into? Of course, I wasn't thinking about the victim or anybody, and I should have been, I was thinking about myself. It was August 4th, and I remember I kept gulping my Adam's apple. And I remember just waiting for them to give me my sentence. And she said, life without parole. This was my judge. And I just remember just dropping my head, just crying. I still remember hearing the sobs of my loved ones that were right there in the stands. And I remember going into the holding tank after that and just feeling hopeless. Like, you know what, I have nothing to lose anymore. I'm just gonna live a crazy life. I'm gonna do whatever I wanna do. What's the point? Fortunately, I had my family by my side right away. Got on the phone and would talk to them, and they were encouraging me, Sam, don't give up, and we're gonna be here for you. Try to do good in there. And I remember my lawyer pulling me aside and telling me, you know what, Sam, he goes, even though you might not ever get out of prison, he says, you could still make a difference to the people that are getting out of prison. You can do positive things in here. Your life doesn't end here. For a long time, I felt like the victim. I didn't kill him. I didn't shoot him. He's the one that did it. I just wanted to do a robbery. But now I look back and realize I was just as guilty because I did nothing to stop it. And I knew he was a dangerous dude. And I still let him go in there with the gun. It took me a long time, a lot of reflection to realize that. But once I realized that, then I understood that I was just as guilty as he was,
How long did it take you to reach this?
A long time. My brother was murdered in 1999, and he was murdered by other gang members. And it also made me to go back and start thinking about how I felt when my brother was murdered. And oddly, at the time my brother was murdered, I didn't compare it or parallel it with what I had did. And once in a while, I just start thinking about him and just start crying. There's still something there, that will continue to be there and that resurfaces. I know my victim and his family, or better yet, we call them survivors. They're still going through this. I was watching one of those cop shows, but I remember seeing an episode where somebody was shot and killed at a liquor store. And I remember the police being in front of this liquor store and the mother, and I remember her driving into the parking lot, seeing all the cops there. And she's like, what's going on? And the cops go and they say, ma'am, you can't come here. And she's like, what's going on? And they go, we hate to inform you, ma'am. We're sorry to inform you, but your son was just murdered. Somebody robbed your liquor store and murdered your son. And she just dropped to the floor and she was crying in tears. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I also did this to somebody. Like if I was that lady, whether you were the driver, whether you were the guy that went in there and shot my son, you killed my son. That first 6 months was like my first chapter of freedom. And then the next 6 months was me going home and, of course, setting up my room and finally, my family finally like seeing how I am as an adult and us learning our habits, and our little quirks. It's like the honeymoon, I feel, is almost over. We've had our first Thanksgiving, we've had our first Christmas. It will be my first birthday in a week.
Really?
Yeah, and I haven't had my first Valentine's Day yet. But I mean, it's like the honeymoon the novelty is now ending. And now it's like, okay, Sam, you got to just live your life now. And all those things you've learned, just continue to do them. There's a lot of more choices. And it doesn't mean they're bad choices. I could have a bunch of good choices, but I have to kind of prioritize, you know. So I want to do more with my art this year. That's my goal for 2018, to do more with my art. When a lifer gets out, a lot of times we notice the trees. Like, wow, we're standing next to a tree, because there's no trees in prison. And I mean, who does that? I just appreciate my freedom more now. And I don't think that would ever change.
You think really for the rest of your life you'll have this sense that, like, I'm not in prison, I'm free?
Yes, I firmly believe that. Because it was just so much to get out, and it was something that I never realized that would happen, especially with my sentence, where they said I was never going to ever get out. And if I ever start taking freedom for granted, I'll start thinking about this.